Several years ago, I attended a casting clinic held by Tim Rajeff. And one of the things Tim did that really made an impression on me that I think is really very important, and I've really tried to incorporate a lot more of it in my teaching since that day, is the rod and how the rod actually behaves in different situations. When you're just casting a small amount of line, the tip of the rod is what's important. When you're casting a medium amount of line, the middle part of the rod becomes more important, but you have to cast a lot of line to make the butt of the rod really work. One of the things that I've noticed with a lot of people is that they really don't have an understanding of how to control the tip. So this section is going to be about tip casting and how to use different parts of the rod and what happens when you use different parts of the rod. Remember, the tip of the rod is what really generates line speed. So even the tip of the rod is important not just for short casts, but for fast and long casts. So let's just take a look at the different parts of the rod. So let's look first at tip casting, just the tip. If you'll notice, when I'm tip casting, and you can see just the tip moving back and forth. Pretty much the butt of the rod, and even the second half of the rod, the bottom half of the rod isn't really moving. And we can move this as fast as we want to, and you can really see that thing wiggle. Now, if you look at my hand, the tip is going to be doing the same thing you just saw a second ago, but watch my hand. Very little motion by my arm or my body. And all I'm doing is trying to twitch just the tip. So that's tip casting. Okay, so what we're going to do now is let's take a look at mid flex. So I'm moving pretty much the middle of the rod. You'll notice that now I'm flexing considerably more of the rod than I was before. But this would be to cast a medium piece of line, maybe 40 or 50 feet of line. So now we have hand motion. You'll see that it's a little bit more hand, a little bit more arm, and a little bit more force. So now let's talk about the butt section. Now think about the butt section as being the part of the rod that provides power. The tip section is the part of the rod that provides speed. So here, we're going to add some power to it, and watch what happens. A lot more power, and you're going to see that that rod was bending down into here. So that's going to give me a long cast. In addition to that, obviously the tip is still moving very quickly and still bending. So let's do this. We've got a line now, and I've just got a couple of feet of fly line out and about a 7.5, 8 foot leader on the end of it. And what I'd like you to do is just take a look at the tip cast and the fact that you can make really narrow loops without moving your rod very much. What we're going to do now is just show the tip, the mid flex, and the butt section being used with various amounts of line. The tip with a small amount of line, the mid flex with the medium amount of line, and the whole rod with a lot of line. So we're going to do that, and we'll put it on the screen so you can see which one's which, and I think you'll be able to see. Watch for the amount of rod and watch my hand. So let's talk about a couple little fun drills you can do to get used to tip casting. And the big theme here is that, remember, that fly line is going to do what your rod says it's going to do, especially that tip. If your tip moves 1.5 feet each direction, your fly line is going to go 1.5 feet each direction. So one of the big themes you're going to see over and over and again in this series and all of casting is that one of the biggest principles of casting is that your fly line, what it does is dictated by what your rod does, and especially what the tip of your rod does during the cast and at the stop. So let's take a look at some of these different drills, and then we're going to show you some practical applications for them. Okay, so here's 2 yardsticks. This is a yardstick and that's a yardstick. And what we're going to do is first we're just going to do little horizontal movements like this. So maybe 1 foot on each side of the yardstick, and you can see what's happening to the line. And then you can get bigger ones. You're using more of the rod. You can go up and down big ones. You can practice doing ovals, big ovals. All these things are fun to do because what they do is teach you how much the rod has to do with it. So this is the drill. Small ones, just the tip. Big ones, more of the rod. So let's show some practical applications. If I'm going to present a fly to a fish downstream, and I want the fly to get to the fish before the line does, one of the things I might do is pretend that you're the fish at the camera, where the camera is. I'm going to set up a bunch of men's slack line casts so that what happens is the current will take the fly down to the fish. So let's just show you, if I move my rod back and forth 1 foot on each side of the tape, you're going to have 2 foot men's, 1 foot on each side. If I move it 3 feet on each side of the tape, you're going to have 6 foot men's. If I move it 1.5 feet, it's going to be 1.5 or 3 foot men's. So take a look at this. Here we're going to do it. First one we're going to do, those are smaller men's. Watch my rod tip. It's just moving. You can do it. You can do the same thing up and down. You can do it sideways. You can do little ovals if you want and create the same kind of a mend, as long as your rod tip doesn't go more than 1 foot or 1.5 feet on each side. Now watch what happens if my rod tip goes farther. Now I've got sort of 3 foot mends because my rod tip went about 1.5 feet on the right and 1.5 feet on the left. 3 foot mends. Now watch 6 foot mends. Now you can see my rod went all the way to the right 3 feet and to the left 3 feet, and I've got these big huge mends. So those are practical applications, and it's really important, I think, to try to do some drills where you can control the tip of your rod and dictate what your line does. The size of the mends, the size of loop, the shape of loop, the direction of loop, all that has to do with where that tip is during the course of this casting stroke and where the rod tip stops. So let's talk about another practical application for the use of the rod tip, understanding the rod tips, the tip, the mid-flex, and the butt section. When you go to take a fly off the hook keeper and you want to extend it, so I want to extend that fly out to, let's say, the second turquoise or teal cone. So that's 40 feet from me, and I want to get that fly out there as quickly as I can. One of the things that drives me crazy when I'm guiding, and I guarantee your guide feels the same way, a person takes this off and they've got to go to 40 feet, and here they are. And I'm thinking to myself, please, 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 put that fly on the water. There's no fish up there in the air. So, how do we do that? Number one, you're going to have to shorten your casting arc and use more tip instead of the butt of the rod. The butt of the rod is not providing you with what you need. So at the very beginning, we're going to take it off. Practice just the tip of the rod with nice narrow loops. These are the loops you want right here. So that's your first loop. So if I pick this up, and this is a good drill, and you can see it in one of the other sections, it's the extension drill. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but my first pickup is with not very much line out at all. Second one, a little bit more line, but I'm starting to use more and more of the rod. And the third one, You're going all the way out to 80 feet from here. That's the 70 feet. So you're just going to use one cast. It's the same thing when you're on a boat. When you're on a boat and you're fishing for redfish, man, you got to get that fly out there as fast as you can. Understanding the tip of the rod first, then more midsection, and then butt section as you go will allow you to understand how to get your fly out there as fast as you can. And we can talk about that. There's another video that talks about that specifically, about how to use a quick cast, but just watch the rod and watch the line. So the first one is just a fairly narrow loop, 1 false cast, 2 false casts, 3 false casts, and on a 4th one, you're out to 70 feet away from your fly. And that's without shooting any line in the back. So that's kind of what we want to try to do, is understand that as the line gets longer, we're going to use more of the rod. But at the beginning, we want to use a small amount of rod. I would highly suggest you do a lot of these drills to learn how to use the tip of the rod and then the mid flex and then the butt flex, and understand the purpose of your rod. It's even more important when you have a really stiff rod. When you have a really stiff, fast rod, you need to be able to understand tip casting. Otherwise, the beginning of your cast, people say, well, I can't cast short because my rod's too stiff. Well, you can still cast short. You just need to make sure this is a Sage 1, a pretty stiff rod. And if you watch this line, even at 20 feet of line, I can make perfectly narrow casts with 20 feet of line out there. Nice and narrow. But you can see my casting arc is small, and I'm just flicking the tip. Okay, there we go, tip casting.